Hello and welcome to another episode of the ADHD Goals Podcast. I have a fantastic guest for you today. His name is Rob Owen, and for over 20 years, Rob has been a school principal, educator, author, and coach. And Rob has seen the deep impact that stress and burnout have on teachers. And after a life-changing car accident at 17, Rob found healing through Tai Chi and Qigong practices that became central to both his personal and professional life. Now he shares these mindful practices through Move to Focus, helping educators and students, especially those with ADHD and anxiety. It helps them find calm, focus, and emotional balance in the classroom and beyond. Wow, that sounds thoroughly exciting. And I suppose, anxiety is something that a lot of people suffer with, but particularly with ADHD. So I'm fascinated to get into a conversation with you. But first of all, how are you today, Rob?
I'm doing well, Laurence. It's really nice to meet you.
Yeah. Whereabouts are you based?
I'm in Santa Cruz, California.
Oh, that sounds too nice.
I got to say, I'm not going to rub it in, but I can just take a short walk down to the waves. And I do that every night right after dinner. It's a pattern,
Yeah. I have visited California for a couple of weeks. It was it was a fantastic experience. I actually went to visit Apple for the day.
Oh,
But yeah, that's a whole other story.
it's a big place and lots to do. I'm in a little area near Monterey, about an hour and a half from San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's a little beach town, but it's slowly growing because we're right over the hill. We call it the hill. Right over the hill is Silicon Valley, right? And so the last 25 years, it has changed drastically over here. It used to be kind of a little mountain town-ish with some, families in smaller place. And then as Silicon Valley came in, everything changes, and the pricing of houses went up and everything changed. But it's all good. It's been a wonderful, transition. There's been lots of benefits to it as well.
Yeah. No, that's one of the takeaway things that I experienced there is, because I was essentially looking to see if there was any work out there because I used to be a UX designer, and a lot of people were saying, the money's good, but finding a place to live is also expensive.
It's that and the traffic, Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, usually when we start the show, we like to find out a little bit more about our guests. So I would love to know if you could tell us a little bit more about your experience with ADHD.
That's just quite the story.
Oh, yeah. It's a quick question, but it's
just a quick question. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I guess I could start with myself because I like to think I know that a little bit more than other things. So as a kid, I struggled in school, and it's classic, right? Struggled in school, got into a lot of mischief, especially it started showing its head that those ADHD symptoms, right around middle school.
Mhm.
I was the classic rambunctious kid, but then it got to the point where I was pushing boundaries, and then pushing more boundaries, and then the academics went downhill, and then the social part of me really developed. My quick wit developed. But at the same time, so did my athleticism, and so did my sense of creativity.
Yeah.
Which wasn't really recognized in school, and as it's still not recognized in school, unfortunately, as much as academics. And then by the time high school hit, I was just all over the place, but I didn't know why. I just thought, I don't know if I just didn't care. And it was the classic, looking back, it's all clear in the rearview mirror, but looking back, it was like, because I wasn't engaged, I was just not engaged in the topics, in the content. I was more engaged in the social world and in athletics.
But were you diagnosed as a child or later on in life?
Nope, not as a child at all. I was just known as the problem child, in the school system. Always lots of love from my mom and my dad, of course, but the school system, I was friends with the principal and the vice principal. They knew me by name. Yeah, and I just, carried that through. And then, again, looking back, I went right into playing in rock bands, so going into creativity, right? And going into martial arts, right? And those two are just classic for folks with this this thing we call ADHD, which I believe is a blessing. It's an energy. I see it as an energy, and we can unpack that. And that energy was pretty all over the place, but I was able to begin to refine it through martial arts, mostly in music.
Which martial arts?
Well, it started with eskrima, which is a Filipino martial art, because I like to brawl a little bit back,
Yeah.
as a teen. Not anymore,
Yeah. Yeah.
but and so it was a very practical martial art. It's called eskrima. It's a Filipino stick art. It's very practical. And then from there, I started training in my 20s. I started training in Shaolin Kung Fu and Qigong and Tai Chi. And that's where I was able to, that was where the big epiphany happened it's funny enough, my attraction to Bruce Lee as a little kid.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I said, well, what is he doing? And, well, he's doing Kung Fu. What is Kung Fu? And so my 20s, I did that. I started studying philosophy and Taoism and Zen and Chan Buddhism and things. And I started training in Shaolin, and Shaolin is about training the whole body and the character and the spirit and the mechanics. It's as much of an art and a development of the human experience and the human body as it is an ability to defend yourself. Within that whole body practice, and then you have all the Chinese medicine involved in the art. We had people from 5 branches acupuncture training at our school because part of the 5 branches is the martial arts. So the recognition of the different energies in the body and how to move those really helped to refine, I think, my thinking as well as the shape of my body. So the idea that the refinement of my energy began in the shaping of my body, right? So physical movements were ways to shape the energy in my body to help refine it, transform it. And so then the practice went into, as I got older, I started to do more and more Tai Chi and Qigong, because then that refinement of energy taught me to slow down. And then once I learned to slow down with the refinement of energy, with the philosophy, with the mechanics, the brain started to slow down and rewire itself. Right. And so things really started to change then. Yeah.
Yeah. Just the way you were describing that then, like the whole essence of, well, I mean, I'm having to rewind a little bit now, but because
Sure.
the reason I asked you about the martial arts is because I've only ever really tried BJJ, so Brazilian
Sure.
Jiu-Jitsu.
Great art.
And I've heard before lots of people say that, one of the things you get into martial arts for is the kind of discipline behind it. And quite often, if you haven't done any martial arts, you think, oh, it's just people beating other people up.
Right.
But with the martial arts, it does tend to teach you something more about life and discipline than necessarily, it's just getting fit to beat people up. And I mean, I think everybody had a Kung Fu phase because of Bruce Lee and all the fantastic movies. And I suppose with BJJ, I didn't necessarily where I was taught. I've tried it a few times. I mean, this is my ADHD coming through, because I've been to about 3 or 4 different clubs and started it for a while and then stopped and started and stopped. But I didn't necessarily get the sense that there was much teaching beyond the moves and things like that. So it does interest me looking more holistically at the teachings behind it. And I'm getting to the question now.
No problem.
But
love it.
What did you, because I'm interested in the word flow, and with ADHD, we talk about flow being a flow state of the mind and being, sort of hyper-focused, but there's an energy that comes from that. But when you were talking about the discipline behind martial arts, it sounded like, that was channeling the whole body into experience and something like flow. And I wonder whether you had felt a change or a difference in any flow states that you felt after practicing the martial arts.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at the time when I was, when I started in my early 20s, it was more like a fascination with the movement. And honestly, I was quite enthralled with my early first few steps on quote unquote the journey through the Tao Te Ching and Taoism. And it was that the Kung Fu and the Tai Chi and the Qigong were the manifestation of this philosophy. And at first, it was an idea of Wu Wei, right? Which is what they call non-doing, which one would say is flow. But I wasn't necessarily embodying it, right? It wasn't necessarily spontaneously showing up out of, if you will, nothingness. It was more about the flow would be, would be found in the forms, or what the Japanese call the katas. So it would be from one movement to the next, from one circle to the next circle to the next spiral, to the hip moves, to the knee, to the elbow, to the right. And so as the body started to move in those ways, in a sense of flow, the mind, which was like a beehive, it still is sometimes, I'm not going to lie, but at the time it was all over the place, even more, of course. The mind had nothing to do but to follow. And so more and more, the mind-body connection really began to come together. And so as the mind-body comes together and the body flows, then the mind will follow. So it's almost like training from the outside in instead of, I'm going to think about the flow. Well, as you know, when you think about the flow, it's not there because the analytical mind comes in. Well, then that's not it. I'm flowing right now. Well, your eye is in the way. The flow happens through a space or awareness internally. And mine was trained externally first. And then, later as I got older, I started reading about it. And then that term flow came in. And I was like, wow, I know that like really well. Like I studied that in all my early Zen and Chan and Taoist text. And I heard that, football stars experience flow. Like many people experience flow, but the way I understood it was in the context of the martial arts and Qigong and Tai Chi in particular. And so when you do these Tai Chi and Qigong based movements, I know we're going to unpack a little bit of this later. That's the fundamental premise is, Bruce Lee, be like water, become the cup. This is it. This is what he's talking about. So when you move in the Qigong and the Tai Chi and you align your body, your breath, and your intent together, there is nothing except that. That's what is. And then that's what moves. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. We will get into the more specifics of all the Tai Chi and Qigong. But I mentioned in your intro that you had a life-changing car accident at 17. And how did this lead on to the martial arts practice?
Yeah. So 17, young and dumb, hit a parked car going 70 miles per hour, no seatbelt on, 200 stitches in the face, pretty much pronounced dead at the scene, and was blessed by having the fire station and all the other places were so near, they were able to get me to the hospital in time. And then that just wasn't my time to go. The best plastic surgeon in the country, I still remember his name, Dr. Yenny, if you're out there, he stitched me up, and I still remember a lot of the details. About a week later, I got out, and it was almost like I was fine. Like I went back to school a month later, and okay, that's cool. And then it was like literally for about a month later, I started feeling little pieces of glass in my eyebrow, like it would start coming out. So and it was a metaphor, kind of, that the glass that was stuck in my face started to work its way out, right? And then it was a couple months, and I'd wipe my eye and it would bleed. What is this? And then see the dog. Yeah, there might be little residuals. So a few months later, things started to shift in my mind, back and forth, little waves of like, what is this? And later I found it's like PTSD, it's trauma. Then about a couple of years later, actually, woke up one morning, couldn't get out of bed. Like my body finally caught up to the trauma that happened, and I crawled out of bed. There were days where I couldn't walk. I was crawling on all fours to the telephone to get my chiropractor to come to my house to get my back and my neck back in so I could go, right? And then kind of these symptoms of trauma and PTSD came in. And so I was, early 20s, was pretty messed up. And then I started to put it all together that, and then this is like residual.
Mm.
So as I was beginning to heal through chiropractics and basically what happened through the chiropractic, I needed meditation. I needed something to relax my mind, but I also, you know, wanted to move my body. And then that's when the philosophy came in. I was already reading a lot of philosophy at the time. And I said, I'm going to go try this. I'm going to go try these Chinese martial arts because I've heard that it could be helpful. So I started going, and over the years, I retrained my body. So all those core muscles, the nonlinear muscles that we train a lot in, that are very important, basically I retrained all those muscles in my lower back, in my neck, in my occipital areas, just through the training. And I started training harder and harder as the practice, because it's all about the yin and the yang. We would also do lots of soft practice, like the Qigong and the Tai Chi, and that would help the mind. So over a couple of years, it was like, well, these symptoms weren't coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, 10 years later, there's next to no symptoms.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, so this is what's happening. So that was my healing journey through these arts.
Yeah. When you first described the getting back on your feet initially,
Yeah.
it sounded like you were extremely lucky that you survived and
Mhm.
and miraculously sort of got back to feeling pretty normal in a
Mhm.
relatively short time. So, I
Mhm.
mean, quite often when people talk about like these near-death experiences, it's
Yeah.
like a light bulb moment that goes off and says,
No, yeah.
life is good. But I wonder, did you have that? Was it only later on after you started to experience the residual pain that you maybe took on board what had happened more? Was there any of that light bulb moment type thing that came?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I knew, I didn't know at first because everything comes in waves, right?
Mhm.
Like everything comes in waves. And so it would just be like those, like the back just completely out of you can't, I was working at a record store at the time, I can't come into work. Well, why not? I literally can't roll out of bed, you know? And then it did like it did show up to the point where I knew that my training the, was the healing factor of all these things that were happening. Because of course, I went through the doctors, the MDs, the psychologists that they don't know. Oh, he's got depression. He's got anxiety. He's got all this stuff. It wasn't until I think it was my Sifu probably, I told my Sifu at the time what's going on. He's like, he didn't even budge. He's like, keep training.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Just keep training.
is that the instructor of
Oh
the
yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
yeah,
Sifu means teacher. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah,
It's like sensei. Yeah. But in Cantonese or
yeah.
Mandarin. So yeah. And in Sifu Nu, he's like, just keep training. And he'd probably seen it before. People working out whatever they need to work out, like anger issues, like trauma, could even be, he goes, God only knows,
Mhm.
ancestral healing, whatever it is. But he knew because the Chinese arts are so old and the movements are so transformative to the body and the mind that it's just like he would always just say, okay, well, okay, keep training, and that's very, you know,
So,
yeah.
what was the transition then? Because obviously, to become a school principal, you know, you must have started your teaching journey at some point, and I'm interested how you transformed from, a kid that, wasn't necessarily as engaged at school.
Right.
How
Yeah.
did you then
Yeah.
what led to,
Right.
the transition to becoming a teacher yourself?
I appreciate the question. I always tell my students after 23 years I've been teaching, I became a teacher to become the teacher I never had.
Uh,
So the teacher that would never, they don't understand me, they can't relate to me, they don't have patience for me or compassion, they don't. So it wasn't until going to college that I really began, like, I remember going to my first junior college class, it was music appreciation.
mhm,
I got out of that class and I was like, I think I like school.
mhm,
I think I like learning. And I didn't like learning since like probably third or fourth grade in Miss Nolan's class,
mhm,
legit, right? But it was when I went to my junior college, San Jose City College, Dr. Baruzzi. And I remember sitting in this class and I was like, I really like this. And then, and then I had taken like a math class, and of course, being an ADHD kid, because no, I wasn't taking math. What was it when I take that semester? Something that I thought I had to take or something. I just dropped it because I wasn't engaged. And this is classic thing, the ADHD. If you're not engaged, you might as well not be doing it. And that's part of the practice too. On a side note, is to do things you don't want to do, right? Because we get hyper fixated on things we're passionate about,
Yeah.
which is important too. It's kind of a double edged. So I began to fall in love with learning.
Yeah.
And once I did that, I started studying music and art and philosophy and literature, and I just couldn't get enough. Like my student loan debt after years was
Yeah.
ridiculous. And I remember went to 3 different junior colleges, went to junior college and worked part-time, played in some bands over the years. And I get to this one junior college. I'm like, yeah, I was thinking about transferring to, like a UC or state. And they're like, you could have transferred 3 years ago. Like, why didn't you do this? Because I was so caught up in like going to school the way we should be going to school, following my passion and wanting to learn and learning what I want to learn. Right. And then it started to, I had a friend at the time who I was playing drums. I'm a drummer and a singer and play a little guitar too. So she was like, "You're such a good teacher. You should teach my friend." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool. I'll do that." So teach your friend. And then one of my buddies hanging out, "Hey, could you teach me that beat? There's no." So before I knew, I had like 5 drum students. I'm like, what's this? Maybe I'm going to be a teacher. And this is like 20. So good with time. And I would say I was like 23 or something like that. I don't know, something like that. And so I got into San Jose State and just majored in creative arts because I wanted to follow a liberal arts degree. And then from there, it was just like, hey, maybe I'll be a teacher. I'll go do this. Yeah, like I filled in some substituting in a summer school at a private school. And I came in there and they're like, yeah, sure, we'll hire you if you're taught. I know, never taught. I just taught drums. And like, okay, that's cool. We'll try you. They thought, I was like the cool young buck kind of kid, kind of teacher, right? Coming in was just naturally good with kids. It was just easy to relate to them. I taught this lesson, it's language arts of all things. And after that, like after the lesson, the teacher's like, do you want to teach during the year? Sure. And then, well, I'm like, I don't have a BA yet. She's like, yeah, we'll just, because it's private school.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can just kind of mix you in. I finished my BA during that first year in, and then boom, she just, okay, we're private school. You don't need a credential. You're done. You're a full-time teacher. And I'm like, oh my God, great. I don't have to work at record stores anymore. And then from then on, that's just what I did. It was just what I did. And then as for the principal title, that's a different conversation. And the reason why is this was about 18 years into education or teaching. And I was done with all the bureaucracy and the stuff I was dealing with the school I was at. And I'm like, classic ADHD, or, creative, impulsive, gonna make it happen. Joseph Campbell, follow your passion. I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna start my own school.
Wow.
So I did. I took a year off and I literally started what they call micro school. It's going to grow micro school as a nonprofit micro school into a private school and then carry on. And I did. I founded a board. It was called Pioneer Academy. I founded a board. I had my first 12 students. I founded it with a therapist. And so it was like a veteran educator with a therapist starting a private school. We lasted 3 years. The funding went out, and that was the miracle. I had 3 years of total success, but I wasn't able to get funding for the next year. I basically graduated. I did it for middle schoolers because they're the ones, any teachers out there, the middle schoolers need the most love. So I founded a progressive middle school and had enough funding to start it. And then after the 3rd year, we just weren't able to carry on. And it was like, looking back, it's like many other businesses, so many businesses fail, but to me, it wasn't a failure. It was a miracle to pay my bills and do what I love to do, running the show as a principal. And then I went back to, as a consultant, I helped started some private consultation, educational centers, 2 of them. And then I went right back into the classroom.
Yeah. That whole idea of starting a school or feeling compelled to see the need to create a school environment, an education environment that is for or for the people that are left behind in the traditional
Yes.
sense is a fascination to me, because I remember probably 10 years ago now, I read the book, and I don't
Mhm.
know if you're aware of it, but a book by Ken Robinson, Creative Schools.
Oh my gosh, I love that man.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sadly, I think he passed away
No,
during
really?
COVID. Yeah.
Oh,
But yeah, because he did that very famous TED talk about,
he
he released another book as well called The Element, which is essentially a series of stories of really influential people like musicians and
Mhm,
dancers and creatives, and who,
mhm,
you know, really struggled with education because
mhm.
education, the education system wasn't made for them, and they were pushed out,
Yep.
but they still showed their intelligence, it just in a different way.
Yes,
And
yes.
once I started with watching that TED talk, then I read the book, and then I became fascinated because I'd had kids of my own, and I thought, you know, the school system could be better. And
Oh, yeah.
my kids were fortunate enough to go to a Montessori school, and I could
Good,
see
yeah.
how accepting, embracing of, you know, holistic. And it was like when you were talking about being engaged with learning yourself, and it quite often seems to me that, some topics are so hard to grasp and so abstract that kids do not engage with it because they don't understand why they're learning it. It's only
Mhm,
when you apply the knowledge to real life
mhm,
that that then somebody goes, "Oh, well, I can see why I would do
mhm.
this." And because, like, it sounds like you're very engaged with people. And if you can engage the subject with the world that it's going to live in, then learning becomes
Mhm.
a whole lot more fascinating.
Yes, yes, totally agreed. Yeah, engagement is key, and, what was this talk? Schools kill creativity,
Mm,
right? I think it was Sir Ken Robinson, right?
yeah. And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so he wrote this book, Creative Schools, and it was about a whole bunch of different schools that had tried to, break the mold and show different ways of
Yep.
how learning can be applied. And it's
Mhm.
fascinating. It sounds very similar to what
It
you did. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The was it Howard Gardner? He talks about the different kinds of intelligences, right?
Hmm.
And so there's, there's musical intelligence, rarely recognized in most systems. You have existential intelligence, rarely recognized in most systems. There's inter and intrapersonal intelligence, right? Those are kind of recognized,
Hmm.
right? These are the ones that I'd always be strong in, but most of them are unmeasured and they're not recognized in the school system. And so therefore I would be engaged.
Hmm.
But when you're talking about visual verbal intelligence or linguistic intelligence, the whole system's based on two.
Hmm. Yeah.
If you don't thrive in one of those two intelligences, you're going to have a tough time in the school system. Why? Because it's measurable.
Yeah.
And so if it's measurable, you can then put a cool little number next to your idea of intelligence, and then you can put that towards the state, and then the state will give you your money, and then you'll get paid, and the school will keep being quote unquote successful and your test scores. But there you have it, the kids. And then sadly enough, they think they're intelligent just because they're academically intelligent. There's the idea of intellectual intelligence, which those don't necessarily always come through. You can have a straight A student, but they may not seem as the most intelligent people when you sit and talk to them because they're developed in academic knowledge and not necessarily intellectual thinkers,
Hmm.
right? So my emphasis has always been and still is the different ways to exemplify intelligence, to hold it, to manifest it, and that being through, and of course I forgot body-based intelligence. Hello, like the body, as we're slowly learning, holds so much intelligence, and now there's so much emphasis on, well, the body holds memory. Wait, now there's all this emphasis on somatic development. And then there's somatic psychology. I'm taking a class with the somatic understanding of the psychological parts of yourself. So this is direct communication with your parts through your body and what your body holds on to. That's body intelligence. That's not recognized,
Mm.
right? Right. So, yeah.
And I suppose imagining this brings us neatly on to, the very fact that schools these days do ignore a lot of those different intelligences and focus just on the measurable
Hmm.
ones. This
Hmm.
is where a lot of the stress and the factors, being able trying to manage kids that need to release or are being shoved into a box of a narrow box of learning when really they
Hmm.
need a lot of movement and a lot to engage
Yes.
in a lot of other these things. This is, I'm assuming, where a lot of the stress for teachers
Yeah.
comes, trying to get everybody along when they're not given the tools that they need. So tell us a little bit more and lead us into what you do with helping teachers. But tell us a little bit more about that stressful environment and your experience with that.
Yeah. So I think there's many contexts to where stress comes in around the classroom, around teachers and how they work with that. And part of it is the way on a larger global awareness is how schools don't recognize these different kinds of intelligences when kids have them, or and then they're not engaged in the content. And then it's a constant battle with, well, class management, right? Or engagement. So I think a lot of and so teachers will feel it with their kids, with their students, but they'll also feel it up high, by the principal or the district head. And then that stress, like, well, what do you do with that? You're probably not going to change the system because it's pretty, well, big and tangled, right? So what are you going to do? So what my thing is, well, when it comes to content, is relating content to the child as much as possible. So finding out first, it's like a self-assessment. I would always say, okay, I would give the kids intelligence tests in the beginning. It's not like a test, like an IQ, but it's like, what's your learning modality?
Mhm.
So if I find out the first day of school, oh, this kid's a musician, this kid's a dancer, this kid's a reader, this kid's a boxer, this kid's a computer whiz. I kind of know like maybe a bit about what they like and what they're engaged in. And then that will then be attached to their learning intelligence because engagement, you know, is what, if you don't have engagement or focus, you don't have anything. You
Mhm.
have nothing. So I always coupled that with human connection,
Mhm.
right? So the idea of trust and relationship with the student, I think that in and of itself lets the student know that they're being heard
Yeah.
and that the teacher cares about them. And that alone will, in general, drop the level of overall stress, right, of the child because they're like, oh, I think this person actually gets me or understands me. So I don't really need to have these conscious or unconscious defense mechanisms up that take up all the energy that could be used for, something more engaging, right? So,
Well, there's an element of if the child feels seen and heard about their own interests, and there's a lot there in their own value and self esteem, and
yes,
then they're a lot more energized to learn, presumably.
abs- absolutely. And so I work with that. And over the many years, I work with the teens and what they need. And a lot of it's connection, relating, and modeling, of course. But I basically, like many of us, what I learned is the practice to slow down my body, to slow down my breath, and to slow down, and eventually the mind comes. So my practice is Tai Chi and Qigong, and that's I created a program around it because I have lots of stories of bringing it in. Well, I brought in mindful meditation before it was a thing. It was a no, I think it was 2000, like 2001 or something. And mindfulness, what's this woo stuff, and
Mhm.
so I was kind of like that one, kind of known as like a hippie teacher or something. I'm like, I'm just doing what I do in my martial arts class. You guys can call me what I want, but call me what you want. But I'm going to do this with my kids. They need to sit and learn how to just focus on their breath. Just that
Mhm.
simple. Or they need to learn how to just move their body really slowly with their eyes closed and just focusing on their breath and feeling the weight of their body on the earth. And so I started doing that. And then over the years, I would do it. And then it wasn't, but a few years back, I was in a school that I'm still at now, fantastic school. We're all about neurodiversity, and the principal is amazing. She's an amazing woman. And I had a class of 10 eighth grade boys with hyperactive ADHD. And they gave them all to me because I was the guy with the gray beard, right? I was the veteran guy. Like, give him to Rob, he can do it. And, they didn't want to be at school, of course. And I was like, wow, okay, this one's going to be challenging. So long story short, I'd be like, guys, we're going to go out to the court today and we're just going to do a couple movements. Well, what is this? I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that. So slowly it morphed into like, they all would be sitting on the bench. Then two kids would get up and slowly start doing it. And three, and I would just do my practice. All right, you don't want to do it? I'm going to do it anyway.
Hmm.
Right. And then slowly I brought them in, and a couple of the boys are a little bit more feisty. So they wanted to see the martial application of Tai Chi, which that's what brought the rest of them in. Right. To, that bringing Tai Chi or Qigong or actually to have a teen slow down, it's a difficult factor. If I'm teaching first through fourth grade, they'll usually just tag along and they'll do it and they'll chill. But the teens started doing it. And then after a while, I had teachers showing up behind the teens doing it. Like, hey, I want to do that. I've seen this before. And then that's when admin came over and they're like, hey, what are you doing? Like, how are these kids? They're kind of like, they're chilling out a little bit. Well, this is what I'm doing. I've been doing this for a while now, and they're just like, well, what if we like hired you next year to just do that?
Yeah.
Like to do mindful movement. I'm just like, I would be stoked. That's what I
Yeah.
want to do. I love teaching academics, humanities, writing, all the above, but this is my practice. So I get to bring my practice into the school.
Mm.
So
This sounds interesting because
yeah,
I'm thinking back to what you were saying about when you were in the classroom and you were
yeah.
doing these assessments to find out what their learning proficiencies were.
Mhm, mhm,
And when you began to talk about mindfulness,
mhm.
becoming a popular term,
You're right.
but it started off and it was a bit woo, like you said.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how you have to sort of package mindfulness up so that different people can engage with it.
Yes.
So,
Mhm,
it might be embraced by, the woo-woo community
mhm,
already, but
mhm,
then, so you go, well, how can I get some guys to do this? Well, if mindful movement or martial arts, if I can
mhm,
package it like that, I might get them into it. And then there might be other people who go, oh no, I'm all about science. So you can
mhm,
say, oh, here's an MRI scan and it shows you the
mhm.
proof of what mindfulness does. And then eventually you can get everybody engaged in it on their level of acceptance if you just give them the right information about it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You say so you relate that into, let's say, the learning intelligence of or what's valued in the accepted school
Mm,
system or in the accepted society, right? And so because we're we're so driven by, science and like what science says, basically science is God, right? So if science says that it's gotta be true, which you talk to any developed scientist and they're like, yeah, to a point.
mhm,
It depends. It's an ever changing, thing. And yeah, so a lot of times it's like proof, science, research papers, so I do, and I think that's important too. I mean, I'm not against Western rationalism. I mean,
mhm.
I'm not even at all. I'm a big fan. I'm definitely not a Cartesian, but I think that rational thought is very important and scientific proof is important. But so is the understanding of just direct experience
Yeah.
and an ancient practice that has made it through. Well, Qigong started 4,000 years ago, right? It's
Mhm.
as old as it's yoga. It's the sister art. Yeah. Chinese, Indian. So it's 4,000 years old, just like yoga. Tai Chi is a little bit younger. It's 700, but still something that's lasted 4,000 years that there probably has some type of validity outside, a little, scientific evidence from the last, what is it, 300 or 400 years? Our science is that
Mhm.
old. It's like, I think it probably has some validity. So I think it's important to present the research, and it's all on my website, of course, because if need be, just, click this and look at all the data and the studies. But when you have direct experience of it, it's kind of a no-brainer.
It's quite tempting to look back on history from where we are now with all the things that we can scientifically prove and just therefore assume that we are in some way more intelligent than the people from the past. But in reality, the practices that have been traditional probably go back a lot further and they've been done that way for a lot longer that you'd have to say, well, there's something in it. And just because we don't necessarily speak in the same, I don't mean literal language, but in the same
Mhm.
values of language, and that they're not in any way intelligent for having found that out. There must be something in it. But I wonder if I perhaps stopped you from telling us how that was it, how you got into Move to Focus, which
Oh,
is your program. And was that where that story was leading about,
yeah,
working with the
yeah.
kids?
Yeah, I would just say, yeah, to what happened is it just kind of formulated and said, hey, like, hey, I should basically offer this to others.
Hmm.
I was just like, I love doing this in my school, and I had some teachers I was training, and they really like it, and working with a couple teams on the side. And some of them I don't even do, like the coaching I do isn't just Tai Chi and Qigong. Some of it is, kind of talk therapy or direct tools on how to work with impulsivity or, impulsiveness or like, inattentiveness or whatever, like tools to work with that. But in Move to Focus in particular, yeah, I was like, okay, I got to learn how to package this and figure out how I can get it to other people. And so, yeah, I designed a, different, I guess, sequence of movements and underlining theory and philosophy that are beneficial for teachers in the classroom. And, basically that's like, okay, the fundamental idea is that a teacher needs to have a morning practice when they wake up, right? Whatever it might be. I think humans should in general, but teachers in particular, right? So I teach like a 5 to 7 minute, whatever they want, but usually it's about a 5 to 7 minute practice. You wake up in the morning before or after your cup of joe, if you drink coffee, and then you have that and that centers you. And so when you get to the classroom, well, you're ready to go. You're centered, right? And you're grounded. Because as you know, when you walk in a classroom, well, the kids are going to be kind of like you, right? And also your perception creates your reality, as we all know, right? So you come in grounded and what you're going to see and centered, you're going to see that. And if you're going to see what's not on center. And so therefore you'll have a better compass to kind of align the group or the overall energy of the classroom. And then the teachers can then take their practice and learn little pieces of it. Let's say it could be like something of like what I call the wave or the butterfly or whatever it is. And then they bring it to their kids. And
Hmm.
so okay, kids, we're going to, put your stuff down. We're just going to do 3 breaths and we're going to start the day cool. And then you slowly build on that, or the kids will do it after lunch when they're kind of all running around and they have outside energy. And then it's like, okay, well, when you bring in your outside energy, especially kids that are hyperactive or right,
Science energy.
unregulated, right?
Yeah.
Their whole body's going to be unregulated. Their emotions going to be unregulated. Their ability to focus and their mind and their intent's going to be unregulated. So what is it you do? You just walk in and say, okay, everyone sit down, take out your math books, and we're going to work on our multiplication. Probably not.
Mhm.
Right. So what is that transition? And everything happens in transition. So during that transition, why not have a practice or a movement or a conscious way to transition the outside energy into the inside, right? And then it teaches the kids, it kind of wakes up a part of them like, wait, now I have the tools for not only for focus, but I have the tools that could regulate my anxiety I have before school
Mhm.
or that I have about my homework or that I have about something going on in my life, you know?
Yeah, I was doing a training course recently, and it was saying something very similar in terms of, the importance of the morning routine,
Right.
in terms of, you know, typically, we these days we wake up and before we've even done anything, we might put something, play something through the radio or on the phone or the TV, and it's likely to be the news, and the news is bad, and it's instantly engaging our fear mechanism, and then we stay in that mechanism. And essentially, what you're saying is the more we can access, that other part of our brain, then we can move forward into the day in a much more positive way. And I was hearing and hearing a similar explanation of, you describing how the teachers meet the children in the class.
Mhm.
I've heard it called mirror neurons, where
Mhm.
how in conversations people will feed off your
Mhm.
energy, and it helps, encourage, conversation and, better relationships if you can help those mirror neurons by being positive.
Hmm.
But yeah. So how can, let's say we've got, is if any teachers are listening and they want to know more about Move to Focus, what can they do on your website? Because I see on your website that you've got an assess your stress level call to action. So tell
Yeah.
it about that.
Yeah. So that there's a couple different ways. I mean, direct communication, you could just do info@movetofocus.com. And that's the number 2, movetofocus.com. That will just be direct. But there's 2 ways. So if you are a teacher, you'd go to Move to Focus and then, click the button for the stress test. And basically there's some questions and you answer the questions. And then if you qualify, most people are going to qualify, you will receive like a little mini course. It's like a
Hmm.
3-day mini course.
Hmm.
And it'll teach you basic movements and ideas around ways to support yourself and your own stress or your own levels of anxiety or your inability to focus. And it's kind of like a taster. And then you can use that in the morning, and they're just repetitive Qigong based exercises. And you can also bring them to your to your students as well. And the other way is robowen.coach. So if you go to robowen.coach, that is my private website for just coaching. So if you're an adult or a teen looking for a one-on-one, that's where we meet up, we talk for 30 minutes and I figure out what you're looking for and what you need. And then we develop together kind of a coaching program, usually anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. And it's usually designed around the mix of what you believe you need or what you want, and then me making suggestions, and then us kind of refining that, and then me kind of following up and making sure that's happening. So then real change can be created.
And so essentially, is that coaching people to practice these morning movements, meditative movements, in different parts of the day, and sort of bite size routine? Well, routine's not the word. Help
Yeah,
me
maybe.
out here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. A little, I would say practices.
Practices. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that in the private coaching, I will always teach a morning practice. Like
Hmm.
it is essential to have a morning practice. If you wake up and turn on the blaring news, and then let's say start eating a candy bar or something, it's just like that's just not the route. It makes such a direct experience, such a direct change if you're able to have a good morning practice, and it could be from anywhere. Most excuses that I hear is I don't have time,
Mm. Hmm.
and it's like you honestly don't have 7 minutes. Like honestly, you don't have 7 minutes because if you have 7 minutes and you learn a practice, you will see a night and day difference from the beginning of the 7 minutes to the end. Like there's no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt. There's not been one time. And so then you take that in little bite-sized chunks and you can use them. It could be a movement-based practice, but it's also like integrated practice. So integrated breath work that you can do when you're standing at line in the grocery store, or where to put your mind, how that all integrates in your life. Because if you compartmentalize the practice, it's not as helpful. We're integrated humans, so you need to integrate your practice,
Hmm.
right? And so a lot of it's that as well.
Well, I think when you talk about people saying, they haven't got the time, it strikes me that sometimes people associate, I don't have the time to do something that's difficult or challenging, or, like doing a workout routine, it feels like work. But I suppose once you feel the benefit of the practice and what that can do to your anxiety levels and how that makes you feel, it's you no longer trying to find time to do a 7-minute practice because you want to do it then.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Once you have like the proof and you start looking forward to it, but it's like a Kickstarter. It's like once you get, I think it's 33 days is the number, but where you create a habit, right? Like I haven't not done my morning practice for, I can't even remember. It's just what you do. It's like you wake up and you have your breakfast. Like if you don't eat, like if I go throughout the day and I don't do my practice in the morning, I could tell there could be a slight fatigue. There could be fatigue and focus, not necessarily, there could be a lower level of patience because I didn't ground myself, didn't ground my body, but I didn't check in and to observe, and relate to and connect to where I am in that morning,
Yeah.
right? I to 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 check in to where I am on that day, on that morning, and it could be a different place, right? It could be the way I slept or whatever, but then I know that, and then I can have my different parts relating to or adapting to that and be aware of them. If I'm not aware of that, what we call self or perceiver, and the parts moving around, it can turn to be quite the chaos.
Well, I've found that the more that I have practiced mindfulness or meditation, that that actually gives me more ability to notice those moments
Yes.
where I don't actually feel, you've got a bit more connection with your body and you can say, oh, that feels a bit like stress. So what's that about? And so with the practice, you become more aware of what your body needs.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And wonderful point. So I think of it as there's the sensation of the stress in your body, and you notice that. And if you are able to notice, observe, let's say your chest, a lot of people feel it, notice it, observe it. And instead of inquiring and going into the evaluative or analytical mind, if you're able to simply be with that sensation and not necessarily ask what it is first, just be with it and soften the body.
Mhm.
It teaches the body to soften into those emotions and into those sensations. And as the body softens, there will be less reaction.
Mhm.
And the conflict comes between the reaction and the sensation in the body. Once you're able to relax into that, then what is this? Where did this come from? Then maybe the narrative can start. But to sense first, sense before, I think I was taught sense before the story,
Mhm.
right? So the mind can observe as the body reacts to that particular emotion. Then sit with it. And maybe you need to suffer. Good. You'll learn.
Yeah.
But suffer for a moment. Even if it hurts or it's sad, uh, be with it. Like
Mhm.
grief, a perfect example. I have pretty good friends with grief.
Mm.
So be with that and don't tell a story or, yeah, it's because my parents are gone. I know that. But let's be with that and be with that. And then be with that more. And then once you do that, you'll find, well, what I've found is the awareness almost unpeels or kind of pulls a layer of that away and acts as a healer. Like the new awareness acts as like a healer of that particular sensation.
Mhm. Well, Rob, I feel like we've only just barely scratched the surface, really. And I feel we probably could carry on talking about this for quite some time.
I think
But
so.
but we are running out of time. So
Yep.
I must say it's been a fascinating conversation and really interesting perspective to, to learn a little bit more about these traditional, Tai Chi and Qigong. I did have to look it
Yeah.
up earlier before to check how to
Right on.
pronounce it. And also just the benefits that that can have for particularly teachers, but also for the children and making that sort of classroom a more wholesome environment to learning. So,
Mhm.
thank you so much for joining me and chatting with me. And I just to let the listeners know, I'll have some links in the show notes, so how you can learn a little bit more about what Rob does and yeah, get some taster of those practices.
Right on. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it. Wonderful conversation. Thank you.
And thank you so much. Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.